Homage to the fundamental teacher Buddha Shakyamuni, homage to the wisdom warrior Manjushri, homage to all the lineage masters. The supreme, profound, and sublime Dharma is difficult to meet even in a billion years, but now I have been fortunate enough to have seen it, heard it, received it, and kept it. I vow to attain the true meaning of the Tathagata. In order to benefit all sentient beings, let's generate the supreme bodhicitta. Today, let's continue with the teaching of transform suffering and happiness into enlightenment. I'm not quite sure yet what to teach after this particular text. I don't think I will give the teaching on the previous texts except Analects for Confucius. I'm not quite sure about the other classes yet. Previously, I thought about giving teachings on Madhyamika Avatara, but we'll see. The main reason of giving teachings on transforming suffering and happiness into enlightenment, it is because I think sentient beings are suffering quite a bit, especially nowadays. People really are terrified of problems and obstacles and sufferings, and it is because how the world has already changed, and there are so many factors that could change, and so many factors of insecurity. So in such a way, everyone's suffering. Therefore, at this particular time, to have a pithy instruction, to have some method to work with all of these suffering is in fact quite appropriate. Therefore, to give the teaching of this text is really a wonderful timing. Of course, it would be really great of not having any suffering. You don't really necessarily have to go and search for suffering, but you don't have to worry of running out of different problems at all, because everyone will encounter problems and sufferings. I remember that I watched a program around the New Year's, and the journalists were interviewing people on the streets, asking them, "Are you happy?" And people would say, "I am happy, I'm very happy." I think maybe they pretended that because if you send out another group of journalists and ask people, "Are you suffering? Do you have problems?" I think lots of people would say yes to that as well. In terms of problems and sufferings, in fact, there are times where there are lots of different sufferings that's added together. There are suffering of suffering, that's suffering of sufferings. You have 2 or 3 problems going on together, even dozens of them adding onto each other at the same time, especially after the pandemic. I think there are lots of people who would feel lots of pressure in terms of their finances, and I think maybe the monastics don't have maybe they don't have lots of feelings towards this, but for lay practitioners, they would have loans and mortgage on their cars and house, and it would be really difficult for them to pay them back. So all of our original patterns, life patterns, and the way we live the life, I think, is not going to get that back in the next 3 to 5 years. In terms of the general global politics, there are changes as well. We can see that through watching different domestic and international news. It seems that there's so much stress between countries. In terms of personal level, people's relationship and their family life and their life, and there's so many different kinds of problems also add on to each other. There are people who would get sick and would worry, did I get the virus, and they don't really want to go to the hospital. Of course, whenever there are such problems, you should learn to accept it. That's the very entrance level of practice. Even non-practitioners could do that. But now we're talking about it. We're talking about not only you should accept it, you should feel happy, like, there's an opportunity for me to practice upon it. It is not very practical to ask you to do this right away, of course. but I think you can start off with thinking that I can accept the suffering to start with instead of I want it to be over. For example, if you get sick, you want the illness to be over, or get criticized and slandered by others, or people chase after you because of the debt. So there's so many different kinds of wishes in your mind, wishing all of these sufferings would be over. But if you're a better practitioner, you would think instead of let all of the sufferings to be over, you would think, well, there's an opportunity for me to practice. It's wonderful that now I have a problem, now I have some sufferings going on. If you have such a rare realization, of course, that's really wonderful. But if you only listen to it, without a practice, it won't work. But if you practice on it, you won't be afraid of suffering anymore. If you continue to practice whatever problems you would encounter in human life, you will be able to face them bravely, and you won't be scared at all. You can accept it with your own ways. That's a very great characteristic and quality you can have, and every one of us really need that. Do people have suffering? Of course. And once you have suffering, if it doesn't harm you or doesn't disturb you, I think this kind of realization or inner stability is quite admirable. Whatever you do in samsara, if you can have this kind of mentality, I think you will be able to succeed. I think this teaching is in fact quite important and very timely. Rather than when we talk about the Prasangika school from Madhyamika, talking about the self-characterizing essence or the true cessation and the 3 and 4 causes and so on, it could be useful, especially when you deeply analyze it, but still a little bit far away from our actual life. And therefore, over here it talks about how everyone have problems and have sufferings. Therefore, it is the practical advice for us to practice. Previously, we've already talked about how you can practice up on renunciation. If you have renunciation, you will be able to renounce the suffering as well. And you can practice up on taking refuge. You will feel not alone anymore. You have a place to rely. The third one is we're going to talk about the third one today, that is to overcome arrogance. I am going to give you the oral transmission.
Deva la gavana, dumur la lupi deva la gana, deva la mbato gusu, nyamder jeperu samla, urku tamani ki chula, ki chu jemperu shawur, nyajela lupana, dabjanda semchang jaya, dumar, te stava dan tili chi nartsur nam samde dedak kyang dumar dan charna chimarung nyamder jang. Devi Pongwa la Mugne, Shamba Gomser, Yang Theatre, Di Shizo. Dagwe Janchi Gombana, Dagundar, Dagmurji, Moktonwana, Tongame Tane, Rang Chibrson, Lambe Tana, 대력 김종의 그냥 진정 코나 라운에 버샤고 냠도 곰 대동 되게 신的 가베 땡한다 지지 기브줄때 나님지 바까르 치자 라니 끈라 콤바데 서바지 소우르 좀때 제나 캬치고 드흥으로 기브줄지 쪽서 송락 직비경 맞췄대 대들 송와데 럭버 모시네 디정거 가와 식적라 진 단보 jigba jig nipper dom kupe cherkut shapa te ta kangse ya dartar dungren di dagla shind nipper kavam thori dang tharwi dertit zangwa mang wa jpi chok gecher shi sirn di tadong yang fietren gerwe ndonor tsip kyang chok da ne de chok da ne de sigmi sigmen nale shamchepi shaka rai latovjan jipartav go nyamda tsrjipt yang samla yedeva la kumbra shago
So the next one, the third point, point C, using suffering to overcome arrogance. As I explained before, we should pick a practice that is the closest to us, the most suitable to us, to work on our problems and our sufferings. If you only talk about the methods in theory, talking about I am not only going to accept suffering, I am going to be happy about it. If you only word it, talking about it, I don't think it would actually benefit you in terms of your inner happiness. In fact, whenever there is any suffering happen to you, it's very difficult to endure that. Some people would even lose faith of living because of such suffering. I think it also depends on people's different karma. There are people who have more positive karma. They are able to endure suffering, and suffering won't be that excruciating for them. But for people with negative karma, along with many complex conditions, they would feel lots of torment. So it's very difficult to control how you would react when suffering comes, especially when there is some illness. There are people who would die in peace without much illness torturing them, and would die very peacefully. And there are people who would die with excruciating pain and illness at the time of death. They would cry out loud and so on. Even some of them are great masters. That is because the suffering would continuously to torture them. And at that moment, if you want to say that I'm so happy that I am suffering, it would be kind of difficult. Sometimes we have the mental suffering. It could be endurable, and sometimes it could be physical suffering, such as headache and so on. It would be very difficult to endure. And at that time, to say I'm happy would be very difficult. Anyhow, if you know the method and could practice at the time, it would still be very useful. As previously we've studied that, as previously stated, I myself had encountered many difficulties and obstacles, and many things that created lots of pain for myself. But I tried very best to transform them into virtuous deeds. And at the end, it turned out not became
也没有必要。如果我们真的
adversities or unfavorable conditions, but in some ways they all transformed into things that had more value and more meaningful. So first of all, don't be afraid. Whenever you're ill, for example, all sentient beings do get ill. If you can practice in such a way with renunciation, that's wonderful.